So I am now joined by a very special three-time recurring guest. It is Aaron Torres. You can hear him Saturday nights on Fox Sports Radio and on the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. Aaron, how are we doing?
Listen, I'm doing really well, man. You're right. We've done this a few times. I think it was around this time last year when kind of COVID was wreaking havoc on college football that we first connected. But I very much appreciate you having me on. I'm a little late to the party here. I kept you waiting for a few minutes, so I apologize, but glad to talk with you, man. Everything good with you?
Everything's great, man. There's so much college ball to talk about right now, but I first wanted to just say thank you for not opting out of this conversation to preserve your draft stock. That was very big of you.
Here's the thing. Some might call this a meaningless interview because I don't get a national prize at the end, but nothing is meaningless when Justin Ayers is involved. Nothing is meaningless when Aaron Torres is involved. And when you send that invite, there's nothing more important in my world. And you know what? If I sprain an ankle and I have to be carted out of this interview, I won't regret it for 1 second. I promise you that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I loved, obviously that was the big take over the weekend in college football was the opt-outs of the meaningless, quote unquote, non-college football playoff bowl games. You had a great take on your pod about this, about how this might be one of the most overblown stories out there about college football. But how do we get to this point? How do we, as a sport, go for talking about opt-outs, and then College Gameday has their takes spouting off about loving football? How do we get here, Aaron?
Well, we got here. It's been a talking point for the last year and a half about, does the media that covers sports really love sports? And I'll tell you this, I'm much older than you. I like to think that I still look young, but seeing myself on camera, I put on a few pounds here over the Christmas holiday. But, I've been working in this business a long time. And I really do believe that there are a lot of people that sports is something they do, something they're interested in, something they're not passionate about. They could take it or leave it, whatever. And so, I remember when Christian McCaffrey and Leonard Fournette were the first two players to opt out of bowl games. What's ironic about it is Coach O tells a story about Leonard Fournette coming into his office crying, wanting to play whatever bowl game that was. I believe it was the Citrus Bowl. And Coach O wouldn't let him. He said, "You have too much at stake. I can't let you do this." And so then it became kind of a media talking point because, again, I don't think the media either doesn't like sports or they don't realize the consequences of the things that they say. It became a talking point of why should these kids play at all? I missed this conversation today, but I was, offline for most of the day. And apparently with the success of Micah Parsons and Jamar Chase, there's now a conversation of should players skip seasons altogether? Because, of course, Micah Parsons and Jamar Chase opted out of last season during a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-generation pandemic. And so that's how we got here, is because I think the media doesn't realize the influence that they have. I don't think they realize the consequences for the things that they say. And unfortunately, college sports has been, impacted by a lot of different things. And so, we can get into the nuance of it all. I have no problem with the transfer portal. I have no problem with the one-time transfer rule. I have no problem with NIL. But what I think we're seeing increasingly more and more, and we've seen it in college basketball for a while because the gap between the high school player that can go to the NBA after 1 year is so much smaller, is that the influence of adults on kids that are supposedly playing a kid's game. I think we're starting to see it. I think we're starting to see it with the NIL stuff, with players transferring strictly for NIL opportunities. We're seeing it all over. But I would say, how do we get here where Matt Corral is being shamed for wanting to play in a bowl game? I blame people in the media, not you and I that love college football, but I think a lot of people that have way bigger voices than they realize, because these voices are heard, these conversations are heard, and now we're seeing the ripple down effects and the trickle down effects and the ripple effects, of this, which is very much that, again, players that want to play, players that do play are shamed and mocked for wanting to do it.
Absolutely. And, this whole conversation, it can always be led back to the new era of college football. And you mentioned a lot of the reasons why this era is so much different. NIL, the transfer portal. And when you heard Kirk Herbstreit on Saturday talking about this, he thinks that this generation of players doesn't love football. Obviously, he had to clarify that. But do you think that the things we just talked about, the ability to make money off your name, image, and likeness, the ability to go wherever you want, Do you think those things have fundamentally impacted the love of the game, or has it always been the same?
I don't think that players love the sport less. Listen, I think in some cases they're smarter, right? And I say this, I think I have the least controversial, least interesting stance on, as an example, bowl opt-outs as anyone could have. I think if a kid feels like he needs to protect his draft stock by not playing, or needs to protect himself from injury by not playing, I respect that decision. We're not talking about kids opting out of a season. We're not talking about kids opting out in week 2 or week 3. Like if there is one game your team is ultimately playing for nothing other than some random trophy, then I have no fundamental objection to that. What was the question again, Justin? Do I believe that players care less about football? That was the question, right?
Yeah, with just like the
Yeah,
new NIL and everything else,
Cool.
just like the fundamental love of the game.
I just forgot the question. That's my bad. I've been up running around since 4:30 a.m. today, and my brain's a little fried right now. So, no, I don't. I think in some cases kids are much smarter, and I think even take something like Caleb Williams. I think Caleb Williams entering the transfer portal to evaluate what is best for his future, I think is smart. I think I encourage him to do it. Not everybody has that opportunity. The backup, long snapper at Tulane doesn't have the same opportunity as Caleb Williams. If he enters that portal, they might give away his scholarship and he might not be able to land anywhere else, right? But Caleb Williams has options. Caleb Williams could potentially be the number 1 pick in the draft, and he's trending towards that. But if he gets with the wrong coach, whether it's at Oklahoma, whether it's somewhere else, that could ruin his career. And so I think in many ways players are smarter. And I don't think that players love the sport less. I think they're influenced more. I think they hear more because, the gift and the curse of social media, right, is that everybody is allowed to have an opinion. It's how I have a podcast. It's how you have a it's because, and people care about Justin Ayers' opinion because of your social media. People care about my opinion because of social media. But what also happens is the alternative is when you get too many opinions, sometimes you get too much information. And so I think that's a lot of what's happening. I don't believe players love the sport less, but I think they're hearing from people that aren't qualified to give them accurate information. You and I love college football. I don't think most people that are talking about these topics on the biggest platforms, let me even backtrack here. When Kirk Herbstreit says it, I think it carries weight because Kirk Herbstreit knows college football. He's in these buildings, these facilities every single week. He's on campus. He's talking to coaches, whatever. Same with Joel Klatt. Same with Todd Blackledge. Same with Reese Davis. Same with whoever, Jenny Taft, Gus Johnson, whatever. If Jenny Taft said, I know Jenny a little bit. I'm not going to claim I know her well, but she cares about college football. She's in meetings with coaches every day. Or every week. She hears about their concerns, what makes them happy, all that stuff. What concerns me is the guys and girls that either have a radio show, that have a talk show, that are on ESPN, that are on another network, that aren't there every day. I mean, Justin, it even goes back to something as simple as, the idea of before NIL, you'd hear supposedly really smart people that get paid a lot of money to talk about sports, talk about it's unfair that these athletes don't get paid. Well, they did get paid. For many years, there was something called cost of attendance in which they literally got a check from the school every month for cost of attendance. It wasn't millions of dollars. It wasn't, but they got paid. And so the reason I bring it up is because most of the people that are talking about college sports are woefully underprepared or unprepared. It'd be like me going on Fox Sports Radio on a Saturday night and giving you the 10 reasons that we need to change the NHL because of XYZ. I know nothing about the NHL. The number of players that I can name that are currently playing in the NHL, I could probably have on one hand. Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin, and after that, I'm stretching a little bit. So I just bring it up to say, even when Kirk Herbstreit says something, whether I agree or disagree, I know he has the best interests of college football at heart. Same with Joel Klatt. Same with, again, I'm going right down the list. Brock Heward, whoever, I can't think of everybody off the top of my head. What bothers me is people that are important, people that have a say, people that matter are saying things that they're uneducated on. And I do think it's influencing kids. I think it's influencing kids to hit the portal, to focus on NIL, to do this, to do that. And so you add in all these outside influences, you add in the actual distractions that come with NIL, that come with the idea that if I have 2 bad days of practice in a row, I can just leave. I don't think they love the sport less. I just think there's more coming at these players. And I think we kind of need to, what's the right word? What's the word when this, how like you're too plugged in and you want to unplug? Like we need to unplug these players from social media, from parents, from mom and dad, because there's only one person that knows what's best for that player. That's that player and the people in that building. Mom and dad aren't at practice every day. The agent that's representing many of these players is not at practice every day. The agent has the agent's best interest at heart, not the player's best interest at heart. And I think that's what Herbie was getting to. And so, no, I don't think players love the sport less, but I do think there's more coming at them on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis.
You brought up talking about the sport of college football. And, if we could take anything away from this past weekend where Twitter was ablaze between the Matt Corral and the love of the football, I think just if we could take anything out of that, it's just that people are talking about the sport of college football. And that's not something that happens a lot. I think you had a great tweet earlier today where you're saying that the NBA coverage versus college football coverage, like the NBA like swamps it. There's so much coverage about it. And the college football always gets dwarfed in comparison. Like, do you see the trend of college football becoming a more mainstream topic in sports fans' minds now?
I don't, I think it's mainstream for a lot of America. I just think a lot of the media that covers it, it's not mainstream for. And, to be blunt, and I don't want to, speak for anybody but me, but I think it's been good for my career that I have a passion for college football and college basketball, because I think there are fewer people at the national level that can talk about this stuff. And so it's allowed me to thankfully, and I'm grateful for every boss, every person that's ever given me an opportunity. But if I was just fired up about the NFL, like, 40 million other Americans, I don't know that I'd have as much of an avenue. And so, no, I do believe that the sport of college football is probably the most undercovered sport in America that we have right now. And I know people that live in Tuscaloosa and Norman, Oklahoma, and College Station would tell me I'm crazy, but I'm just talking about on the national scale where, we hear a million segments on TV about LeBron versus MJ or Westbrook this or whatever. And it's like, I'm telling you right now, I'm just telling you, there's more people in America that care about where Caleb Williams is going next year, I believe, than what Russell Westbrook did last night for the Lakers. Now, if this was May and it was game 4 of the Western Conference Finals, then maybe that's a little bit of a different deal. But I just bring it up to say I do think it's undercovered. I do think if I was a radio producer or a TV producer, I would tell my on-air talent, hey, you have to have an opinion on Caleb Williams. This is the new world that we live in. We don't stop talking about college football the day the season ends with the national championship game and don't start talking about it again until SEC Media Days in July. This is now a 365-day-a-year sport, college basketball. I ran a college basketball transfer website this offseason, and I can tell you the interest in transfers is through the roof. It is free agency in some ways in college sports. And so I just bring it up to say I still think they're woefully undercovered. I think people think that it's regional, but think about Caleb Williams, right? Caleb Williams, first of all, probably 8, 9, 10 million people watched him in that Red River rivalry game, which was probably more than anybody that watched LeBron on Christmas Day. But then you have the reality that he could end up at USC with Lincoln Riley. He could end up somewhere in the Big Ten. He could obviously end up in any number of SEC cities, as well as back in Norman, Oklahoma, which is a soon-to-be SEC city. So that's a story that touches every segment of society. Now, do I think that, on September 8th, we have to break down, Georgia versus, UT Chattanooga, as opposed to talking Cowboys, Eagles? I don't. But I do think it is a pretty undercovered sport nationally. And I think the Caleb Williams thing is a perfect example where this story is so much bigger and the interest so much greater than I think a lot of people realize.
Absolutely. And you bring up so many great points there, because you're right. Like it does feel like as soon as the national championship game ends and the confetti is getting swept away, it's like, all right, well, don't have to worry about that until either, like you said, media day, or when the season kicks off in August and September. It's just,
and yet somehow the NBA basically gets covered and I understand the NBA is a better story. The NBA produces good stories and good characters. I look at the ratings. I look at what people are interested in, and I know people aren't interested people are not as interested in Russell Westbrook as some of these TV shows and radio shows would want to make you think. They aren't as interested in Steph Curry breaking a 3-point record in the middle of, November. I mean, I remember talking to somebody during that week, and it's no disrespect to anybody who does national radio, national TV, but, Steph Curry broke whoever's record. I don't even know. What was it? Ray Allen's 3-point record. Yeah. And it was like every show was wall to wall Steph Curry. And it's like, is there an interesting opinion to have on this? Like, he's the greatest shooter of all time. Like what's the segment? Why do we, and so I just look at, exactly what you just said is I'm not saying college football has to be covered. I'm not saying Stephen A has to lead with college football in whatever May 12th, if there's no story. But I just think that it gets so undercovered relative to the interest in it, especially relative to the NBA, which basically, to your point, once the season starts, all these mainstream shows are talking about it quite regularly.
I just hope we can get to a point with college football that like big important dates don't like sneak up on people, because like early national signing day was a couple weeks ago. I had no idea. Like the college football recruiting cycle, it just sneaks up on people. And I mean, I think it's fascinating now to go back and look and see about 4 stars and 5 stars and stuff coming up. But like, I just hope we as a country and we as a sports media fan base, like, I hope we can finally, like, it could be ingrained in our brains the same way the NFL draft is, or like some of these other big like players moving around dates. I don't know if you feel the same way about like how recruiting gets.
And I would just say is, that's a perfect example, right? So Texas A&M puts together a historic recruiting class, and I'm not a recruiting expert either. But, there's a pretty direct parallel, and I forget what the number is, but I think it's like 13 of the last 20 national champions have signed a number 1 rated recruiting class at some point in the 4 years before they won a national championship, right? That's the easiest segment in the world. Is Texas A&M the next new school to win a national championship? And are they the next school in the college football playoff era that hasn't won one yet that's about to? We talked about it. I filled in on Fox Sports Radio the day of the college football semifinals. Myself and Jason Martin were on during the Alabama-Cincinnati game, and that was the segment we did is who is the next team that is not currently in the playoff, picture to get in for the first time, the way that Michigan did this year, the way that LSU did 2 years ago. And I thought it was a fun segment, and we got good reaction. We got some tweets in, and, Twitter and phone calls and radio are not a be all end all. But, those are such easy conversations rather than doing the same, again, LeBron versus MJ or whatever. And I feel bad for LeBron versus MJ because it's just the typical throwaway, hey, we need to do a segment here. But, sometimes I just look at what we're talking about and how we're covering stuff. And it's just like, I think that I don't know how to say it delicately, but I just think a lot of people, I think the reason I've been able to, I think, have some success, and I don't know if I'm really successful or not, but I do host, a national radio show. My podcast numbers, I could show you a graph. They're going straight up. And I don't think it's that I'm this incredibly, amazingly talented person. But one thing I've always thought is I do think I have a good pulse for what sports fans want to talk about. And I tend to think that a lot of people that make decisions in terms of, radio producers, TV producers can't say the same thing.
Yeah. And it goes back to what you said earlier. People care about this stuff. The vocal minority there, they care about, where recruiting classes are ranked and all that stuff. But I want to talk about, you mentioned Alabama and all these big time programs. I mean, we have a college football playoff championship game on Monday night. So I looked, I'm dipping my toes in the water of the gambling stuff. I'm relatively new. I see a spread of 3 points. Does that mean we're going to see a close game, or how do you see those two teams shaking out?
Yeah, I mean, it could mean anything. I mean, the spread is just, my understanding of it is, Vegas and the odds makers are trying to get equal action on both sides. And it doesn't always work out like that. I mean, it was something like 94% of bets. Alabama was a 13.5-point favorite against Cincinnati. And it was something like 94% of bets came in on Alabama to cover the 2 touchdowns, which basically means that Vegas lost its shirt on that Alabama-Cincinnati game. So listen, yeah, I mean, I'm naive enough to think that we're going to get a close game. Maybe I'm biased because I picked Georgia to win the national championship in the preseason. And maybe I'm dumb enough and I haven't decided who is my official, who's my pick. I could see Alabama doing what they did to Georgia a few weeks ago. I could see Georgia having a bounce back like they did against Michigan and coming out much better, more prepared, all that good stuff. And so But to answer your question, yeah, it's I would expect it to be a competitive game. It's weird because, like, I don't know if you can say Georgia was shell shocked because they were up 10-0 at one point. But I do think the first time that Alabama had that big counterpunch, Georgia hadn't really been counterpunched like that all year. And I do think it was kind of a shell shock and a step back. And I don't think they ever really recovered from that. And then I think once they did get that punch in the face, I thought that they didn't react very well, not only the players, but I thought the coaches got away from the run game. They got too pass happy. They felt like they had to make up all the points in a short amount of time. And so I'm, again, hoping for a competitive game. I'm biased. I picked Georgia to win the national championship. I have no personal rooting affiliation other than that. But I'm hoping for a close game. I'm hoping for a fun game. But the stat that still does jump out to me is that Nick Saban's only been an underdog probably about 5 times in the last 10 years, which is insane. But he hasn't lost as an underdog. He hasn't not covered as an underdog since the 2008 SEC championship game, which was Tim Tebow, Aaron Hernandez, Urban Meyer at Florida. So that gives you some perspective on how long ago it was.
One narrative that I always hear brought up about this Alabama team this year is that it's not one of their most talented teams, but I mean, I think they make up for that this year with great coaching and great game plans. Like that Cincinnati game, like they have the second best pass ranked or pass defense, Cincinnati, and Alabama ran the rock like 50 times. Like, and in the SEC championship game, they aired it out 44 times. Like, what do you think is going to be the game plan from Alabama this week to try to, because, playing the same team twice, that's another narrative that's always brought up. Like, can you beat them twice in a row? But like, how do you kind of see like Alabama scheming it up this time?
Yeah, I'm not an X's and O's expert, but that is one thing, I've had people in football tell me is like what separates Alabama from most everybody else is, besides the fact that they have the talent, it's how they use the talent and their ability to win games a lot of different ways. And that was really what stood out to me in that that semifinal against Cincinnati. They established on that first drive, you cannot stop us. And Cincinnati couldn't stop them. And I thought it was actually a very smart game plan by Alabama is we don't want to think of national semifinal games as tune-up games. They're supposed to be the 4 best teams in the country. But I think there's something to be said that may be the case. And so when I go ahead and I look at this national championship game, I think it's exactly that. I don't know what the game plan is because I don't know if Alabama feels like they caught Georgia off guard with the kind of the deep passing, the vertical passing. I don't know if they feel like they have to run the ball more. But what I will say, and maybe, again, this is my bias coming in, I was one of those guys, Justin, throughout this season that said this is not a vintage Alabama team. They have flaws. They barely beat Arkansas. They barely beat Auburn. They barely beat Florida. The Tennessee game was a 1-possession game late into the game. LSU fired Coach O, and it was a 1-possession game. And so that's another reason that makes me think that maybe we did see the best version of Alabama in that SEC championship game. I'm hoping for something more competitive, but I'm not the X's and O's guru. I have ideas. I think it goes without saying Georgia has to stop the vertical passing game, make Alabama beat them running the ball. Now, Alabama was really effective running the ball against Cincinnati, but Cincinnati, with due respect, doesn't have the same dudes up front as Georgia. So, I haven't spent a ton of time like really thinking, how do I think this game's going to go down? But obviously, look, I think Georgia has to commit to the run and they can't give up on the run, even if things go poorly for a drive or two. And then I think obviously they have to stop the deep pass and make Alabama beat them between the tackles, because that was something that really, up until that SEC championship game, Alabama just struggled to block anybody basically that they played all year. And again, that kind of is what still sticks with me from that SEC championship game, is I saw so many people after that game saying, oh, I picked Georgia because I didn't think Alabama's offensive line could hold up. And it's like, none of us did. None of us thought they could. So that's probably going to be the biggest thing is can Georgia get a little bit more pressure on Bryce Young? He was on his butt against Auburn. He was on his butt against A&M. He was on his butt against Arkansas. We'll see if Georgia can have more success than they did last.
I like that. All right. A couple quick college football topics before I let you get out of here. Jim Harbaugh. We talked all about the Georgia team they just played. So Harbaugh's apparently been open to the idea of coming back to the NFL. I've heard Oakland, Vegas Raiders mentions the possibility. How does the timing of this feel for you? He finally beats Ohio State. He finally gets to the playoff. I think the fan base and everybody else is starting to rally around Harbaugh. Like, why do you think he would choose this time if that is correct? Like, why do you think he would want to leave to go to the NFL right now?
Well, I think there's something to it. I think he could stay too. I don't think it's that he's actively doing everything that he can to get out, but I think it's a few things. I think one, um, you know, this is kind of as good as it gets, right? I mean, you just referenced the Georgia game, and they had a great season. They won the Big Ten. They beat Ohio State, but they got destroyed by Georgia. And so if you're Jim Harbaugh, if it takes 7 years just to beat Ohio State, well, now there's only one step left to take, and that's win a national championship. And I think we saw the other night that there's still quite a few steps away from really, having a team, and they maybe never will have a team good enough to beat a Georgia and an Alabama back-to-back, or an Ohio State in the playoff and a Georgia, or a Georgia and a Clemson back-to-back, or whomever those two teams are. And so I do think there's something to the timing of this, where I think he probably realizes it's probably as good as it gets. 7 years in Ann Arbor, it took me to beat Ohio State. I kind of had to have everything line up perfectly for me, where I had a veteran team. I had the right coaching staff. Ohio State had the right deficiencies that I could exploit, where most years we know that Ohio State just has the better team, point blank, end of story. So there's that element of it. I think the other part of it is maybe he doesn't really want to leave, but maybe he wants to be compensated like he was a couple of years ago when he was one of the highest paid coaches in college football. And I talked about this on my podcast this morning, I think what's changed over the last year, listen, Harbaugh had to give back that money to keep that job. But what's changed now is when he gave back that money all the way back in 2020, back in the dark ages, $7-8 million was a lot to pay a college football coach. James Franklin just got a $75 million extension. Mel Tucker, who I know Mel Tucker is 2-0 against Jim Harbaugh, just got a $95 million extension. And so I think he's sitting there saying, listen, I took this pay cut because it's what we all had to do to get back on track, but I'm not going to get paid like the 13th highest paid coach or whatever he was in the Big Ten last year. And by the way, if he pulls it off where he gets all that money back and he donated all of his bonuses back to the athletic department, that's a pretty ballsy move. I'm trying to think of the appropriate way to say it on your podcast here, Justin. But I think all of it comes into it. Is will it ever get better than this year? It took 7 years to beat Ohio State in a year where we know Ohio State had flaws. I mean, even when Ohio State won the Rose Bowl, they still gave up however many 45 points and 500 yards of total offense or whatever. So is it ever going to get better than this? And then I think the other thing is the money thing is listen, he was a good soldier. He did what he had to do to keep that job. He did what he had to do to stay at Michigan this time last year. But now he's sitting here saying, wait a second now, I did my job. Now it's time that you pay me accordingly. So we'll see what happens. I don't think by any stretch it's a done deal one way or the other. But I do think it's one of those stories, Justin. It's just there's a lot of interesting thought behind it. And I could really see it going both ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you brought up so many great points in there. If he does choose to stay at Michigan, like the team that he has this year going into next year, I mean, they have, JJ McCarthy, this great 5-star quarterback, Cade McNamara. Like, do you think that if he does ride it out a couple more years, they could have similar-ish success? I don't necessarily think they're a playoff team every year, but do you think Michigan's built for the long haul right now?
Honestly, I hate to say it. I think part of it is what happens with that, with the other school, with that school that wears red, scarlet, and gray, is listen, Ohio State has mathematically gotten worse every year under Ryan Day. Now, I don't think Ryan Day is a bad coach, but the defense hasn't been the same since Jeff Hafley left. Jeff Hafley is now the head coach at Boston College. And so I think part of this is, listen, right now, Ohio State just across the board recruits a higher caliber of athlete than anybody in the Big Ten. It's not just a Michigan problem. It's a Penn State problem. It's a Michigan State problem. It's an Iowa problem. It's a Wisconsin problem. So I think part of it comes down to how are the players at Ohio State being developed? How are they coached? How does the new defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, how does that work out? Because I do think that's going to be a factor in Michigan's success. I mean, my hope is that, as you said, J.J. McCarthy was highly regarded. He actually, I thought, played pretty well, all things considered, in that championship or that semifinal game. Now, admittedly, Georgia obviously was calling off the dogs at that point on defense. But, I do hope that this turns into a little bit more of a rivalry, because I think we saw this year how fun it can be when it is an actual rivalry, when both teams are kind of on equal footing. And it's been forever, since that's been the case. And so, I do wonder if they can. I don't think, like you said, I don't think that it's going to be now Michigan wins the Big Ten 3 out of every 4 years, and it's Ohio State that wins it 1 out of every 4 years. But I also think that they're probably the team that's best equipped in that conference, them and Penn State, to dethrone Ohio State if that's at all possible. But then also, I do think part of it is on them. Can they keep that coaching staff together? Can they develop players the way they did? How does J.J. McCarthy develop? But then I do think part of it, like I said, the guys that are wearing scarlet and gray, if they knock this defensive coordinator hire out of the park, if they're more physical up front, then it changes the dynamic of this thing. Because like I said, obviously Ohio State right now is signing better classes. For people that don't follow recruiting, there's just a fundamental difference between the type of talent that comes in a top 2, top 3, top 4 class as opposed to a French top 10. So those are some of the factors that would go into can Michigan sustain this? And I hope for the sport of college football that they do. I thought it was good to have some fresh blood in the playoff this year.
Right. It's so much more fun to have a great Michigan-Ohio State rivalry where it's a little more competitive, So I just have one more quick topic for you. You've mentioned him a couple of times before, but I just want to unpack a little bit more about Caleb Williams,
Sure.
Oklahoma quarterback entering the transfer portal. That very odd message that he put on his Instagram and Twitter saying that he loves Oklahoma, but he's going to transfer to just see where his head's at. Oklahoma, obviously, they would obviously want him back, right? Who wouldn't want him back? But why did they immediately just go out and get Dillon Gabriel in the transfer portal? That didn't make sense to me.
Well, I think what we're seeing now is this is the new world of college football where players have more control and more power than anyone else, or they have more power than they've ever had before. But schools aren't just going to sit around and let them wield it recklessly. And I'm not saying Caleb Williams is reckless, but what I'm saying is Oklahoma decided, you know what? We can't sit around and wait 3 or 4 weeks and I don't know if it's going to take 3 or 4 weeks. Classes are starting. If Caleb Williams wants to transfer, he's got to make a decision probably in the next week or two. But I think Oklahoma was kind of like, we can't sit around and wait until February 1st or the middle of February and hope that you decide to come back. We got to do what's best for this program right now. And Dillon Gabriel obviously has a relationship with their new offensive coordinator, Jeff Lebby. Jeff Lebby was with him at Central Florida, But I was surprised by that because Caleb Williams, I think maybe has the most upside of any quarterback in college football, maybe not named Bryce Young. I mean, CJ Stroud, yeah. But I mean, those are the big 3, right? In some order. And then 2, listen, to go back to his decision, I don't blame him one bit. Like I said, he didn't commit to play for Brent Venables. He didn't commit to play for, Jeff Lebby, the offensive coordinator, and he has to do what's best for him. But I'm curious to see what else is out there and what else, because you can go play for Lincoln Riley, but the offensive line isn't where it needs to be. The defense, that USC thing, I live in Los Angeles, and I think that program is a little further along in the rebuild than I think a lot of people realize, especially in the trenches and on defense and along the lines. Do you go to, Georgia was a name that I heard pretty early. They haven't really had much of a track record of developing quarterbacks. Oregon has an entirely new coaching staff. You go on and on down the list. LSU, we saw the bowl game the other night. They had 39 scholarship players. I mean, you're going to have to do a lot of the heavy lifting if you go to LSU. And so I just bring it up because when he made that statement, I really thought in his heart of hearts, he wanted to return to Oklahoma because that was probably the best spot for him. But on the flip side, I don't know if there's really a spot left for him in Oklahoma. And what I would say in the bigger picture too, Justin, really quick, and we can get back to Caleb Williams if you want. I do think this is one thing that, again, I think the people that don't understand college football and college basketball, and I'm sure it's in other non-revenue sports as well, everybody wants the one-time transfer and all this and all that, and I'm not opposed to it, but there are unintended consequences. And one of those consequences, and I've heard this horror story for years, especially in basketball, is a kid enters the portal, that's fine. But the coach has to go out and fill that scholarship. If you're the starting point guard, Justin, I don't think you're going to be back. I got to go find myself a point guard. Then what happens if you want to come back? Then what happens if you're the 8th, 9th guy on the bench in basketball? Then what happens if we give away your scholarship and you don't get the offers that you think you're going to get? And so I just bring it up because these are the unintended consequences where Caleb Williams on a very, very, very high level steps into the transfer portal and they give his scholarship away before I think he was even technically in the portal. But then on the flip side, and I understand it wasn't technically his scholarship. If he wanted to come back, they'd find a scholarship for him. But there are guys that like I said earlier, the backup long snapper for Tulane might enter the portal just to see what's out there and might realize there's nothing out there and his scholarship's gone by the time he comes back. And so, these are some of the unintended consequences. We give, all these freedoms to the players. I'm not saying they don't deserve it, but I'm just saying there are unintended consequences. And I think this is one of them. And I think on a very high scale, we saw what the consequences are when you do enter that portal, that in 2022, these coaches are smarter and they respect players' rights to do this kind of stuff. But that also isn't going to stop them from giving your scholarship to somebody else if they want it.
Right, because the portal is such a slippery slope, because like you could have great success stories like Spencer Rattler, which I think everybody universally agrees that South Carolina is like an awesome space for him to go, and the coaching staff there, and he's probably got an awesome year. But then you have the flip side where it's like, if he wants to come back to Oklahoma, like you said, they would probably find a way to make a spot for him. But yeah, I think it was Caleb Williams' dad who said that his main concern was trying to find a place where his son could become NFL ready. Do you feel like the new regime at Oklahoma, the Brent Venables, the Jeff Lebby, do you feel like that's a place where, if Caleb doesn't come back, but like, do you think that's going to be a caliber of university where we can see guys go there to develop at high levels?
Well, I think they certainly think so. I mean, you have one of the best defensive coordinators in recent college football history running the defense in Brent Venables, and Jeff Lebby obviously has had a ton of success at UCF and Ole Miss over the last couple of years, excuse me. I think what's more interesting about Oklahoma is what is their ceiling in the SEC when they're playing, instead of 1 to 2 teams a year that have similar talent, 8 to 9 teams a year with similar talent. And it was so funny. I was just talking to somebody about this with Lincoln Riley the other day, and it was something we all have talked about over time. I'm sure you've talked about it a lot on this show too, is like this narrative that Lincoln Riley is somehow afraid of the SEC. It's like Lincoln Riley isn't afraid of the SEC, but when his program is used to winning 11 games and he knows that probably 8-4 or 9-3 is going to be a good year in the SEC, well, guess what? We can sit here and say, you and I as non-Oklahoma fans, that, hey, they're probably about a 9-3 football program in the SEC. I don't think that's going to make Lincoln Riley feel any better when they actually go 9-3 and people are saying that he quote unquote lost it. He's not as good as ever. So I get why he made the decision that he did. And so, yes, I think Oklahoma can become a really good program. Listen, they've been a great program forever. And, they brought it up, most wins since 1999. So saying they could become a great program is the dumbest thing that I've ever said. But the point I'm trying to make is, could they become a place that develops a ton of NFL players? Yeah, of course they could. But guess what? You know who else does that? LSU and Florida and Georgia and Alabama and Auburn and Tennessee. And now Kentucky's putting guys in the league. South Carolina, as you said, is a program that appears to be on the rise. Texas A&M just signed the #1 recruiting class in the country. And so that's what's more interesting to me, is I'm just curious as to what Oklahoma's ceiling is in the SEC, and is Brent Venables given a fair shake? I mean, because again, he's walking into a program where 11-1 this year, 10-2, and not winning the Big 12 was considered a down season. And that was with Iowa State, Kansas State, Texas Tech, all these teams on the schedule. What happens when Iowa State and Kansas State get replaced with Georgia and Auburn or whatever? So I could go on, but to me, that's what's interesting is, yes, I think Brent Venables and Jeff Lebby will produce and put out a bunch of pros. I just think they're going into a league where everybody does that, and I just don't know what the ceiling of that program is.
Well, yeah, I'm a big Oklahoma fan, actually.
Are you?
Yeah, boomer sooner. But absolutely, when Lincoln Riley left,
are you one of the guys subtweeting Lincoln Riley and being all mean to him, or what?
No, I got it. Like, I understood why he did it. That doesn't make it any easier to swallow. But like when people are saying that, he's scared of the SEC, I there's a part of me that kind of agrees with that. Like, then I also agree that he also likes probably having an easier chance to go to the college football playoff in the Pac-12. But I mean, if you had to put money on it, where do you think Caleb's going to go? I mean, I can't see him going back to OU. My feeling is USC, and I'm sorry, Jackson Dart. You have to, go somewhere else.
I'm with you. There's talk about, certain NIL demands and all that stuff. I don't know enough about that. For me, it's nothing more than any speculation that you hear anywhere else. I thought going back to Oklahoma was the best bet, but I'm with you. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't know if there was communication between him and the coaching staff, because I think that like you said, the way that they moved on Dylan Gabriel, either they haven't been talking to him, or they really didn't believe that he was going to come back. But yeah, I mean, listen, I would say this is to me, if it comes down to NIL, I'm not trying to be stereotypical or whatever. I think it's probably an SEC school because it really does just mean more in the SEC. It really does. And if it's simply about dollars and cents, then somebody's going to put together a package that blows him away, and good for him. Go make your money. But I think if it's really about development, as his dad said, then I think USC to me makes the most sense. It really does. I do think there's some limitations, but now, Mario Williams obviously entered the transfer portal the other day. The former, high 4-star receiver probably follows him. So I think Caleb Williams is going to be successful anywhere, but I do think it does make sense for him to go back with Lincoln Riley. And I'd say this too. I don't know a ton about what USC has in mind for NIL stuff, but I'm sure something can be arranged at SC with the boosters in the background that this program has and stuff. So I'll tell you, from an NIL branding, I do think the dude that helps elevate USC, that's a pretty good lane to be in if you're Caleb Williams, and then you're obviously reuniting with your head coach. Again, I worry about his safety behind that offensive line that I've seen the last few years. And he's going to be basically Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech. He's going to have to put up 50 points every week, which he might be capable of doing. But yeah, no, it's just such a fascinating story. And it's for all the reasons that you and I are talking about, Justin. I didn't know you were an Oklahoma fan. But the idea that they took Dillon Gabriel right away, the players that were lost to the portal, the players that have since committed in the high school ranks, it's just been a fascinating, couple months at Oklahoma. And it really does show you kind of what this new world of college football is, where a coach leaves for another job, and it can really switch an entire program overnight. It'll be fascinating to see what happens from here.
I just have one last question, and it's a very basic question because I'm not that up to date on UCF football. Is Dillon Gabriel good?
Yes. So it's so funny. My radio producer literally he's an Oklahoma fan. He's actually an Oklahoma student. He's an online student. He lives in LA, but he's an Oklahoma fan. And he literally asked me this yesterday. He's like, so is Dillon Gabriel even good? Yeah, he's really good. He's super accurate. When he played under Josh Heupel, he just threw the ball all over the park. I assume Jeff Lebby's going to put together a similar offense. He's not a super dynamic athlete. He's not a great runner. The way you think of like even Matt Corral's not like a super dynamic athlete, but he's a good runner. But Dillon Gabriel's accurate as hell. He throws a beautiful deep ball. I think he'll be really good at Oklahoma. And it's funny, I was actually telling my producer this, and I don't know if I totally agree with – I said it, but I don't know if I totally agree with it 24 hours later. But, the old saying of a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush or whatever. If the alternative is you can take Dillon Gabriel right now and you 100% lose Caleb Williams, or you don't take Dillon Gabriel, and he was supposed to start classes at UCLA soon, so I think they had to take him pretty quick, or you don't take Dillon Gabriel and hope to keep Caleb Williams, I hate to say it, I think you got to take Dillon Gabriel. So it's fascinating, but it's the new world of college football, right? And now what does UCLA do? Where does UCLA go from here? As you said, if Caleb Williams goes to USC, what happens to Jackson Dart? This is the gift and the curse of where we are in college sports, where, congrats players, you got a lot of rights, but now guess what? The game has changed in some good ways, but some bad ways too, where Jackson Dart probably woke up Monday morning thinking, man, I'm going to be the starting quarterback at USC next time we run out of that tunnel. And then Caleb Williams at the portal. And I'm sure that the Dart family is probably a little stressed. And I'm sure the Dart family is probably, just kind of perusing depth charts as we speak, trying to figure out what other opportunities may be available if Caleb Williams does end up becoming a Trojan.
Let's make this transfer portal like the NBA free agency does, because let's have why can't there be a college football version of Woj who's on the transfers 24/7? That's what I want. And also just hearing Jackson Dart, that just cemented in my brain that that's the best quarterback name I've ever heard. So
it's pretty good up there. And he's pretty good too. I mean, he only really played one game, and I don't take anything that anyone did for USC this year with much of a grain of salt. I take it with a huge grain of salt because USC was a dumpster fire the entire season. But he played one game fully healthy. It was against Washington State. He threw the ball all over the field. So, So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. But again, this is the new world, and it's just like, it's just it's what we wanted. It's what we have. I think in some ways it makes the sport much more compelling. And we'll see what happens. I am curious. One, we got to get Mark Emmert out, but I'm curious. I think we have to put some sort of guardrails on it where, let me ask you a question now. I don't mean to flip it on you.
No, absolutely.
But as a Sooner fan, and maybe I'm just naive and I don't live in that bubble, but when Caleb Williams played in the bowl game, I thought that pretty much squashed the idea that he was going to be transferring. Was that like the talk in Sooner Nation, or am I just completely off base on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I don't know if that first of all, I was just happy to see him play because I absolutely thought he would have pulled a Kenny Pickett and just sat out because, well, even though he didn't want to project his draft stock, like it's a meaningless bowl game. But like the fact that he seemed like a ride or die guy that was like out there gunslinging it with the guys one last time. Like, I don't know. I hope that, I mean, I would love to see him come back to Sooner Nation, but I mean, if that was truly the last time we see Caleb Williams wearing the crimson and cream, I'll be fine. We're good.
No, and that's where I think there has to be some sort of guardrails. I was talking to somebody about this morning in college athletics is, one, I think a lot of the transfer stuff, I think a lot of what it would be good. And I think this year was a little bit different because so many coaches left. And I mean, it was so fast where it was just one after the other. Brian Kelly's out. Lincoln Riley's out. What does that mean? Now Brent Venables is going here. Nobody knows Brent Venables. And Mario Cristobal's leaving here. And Dan Lanning, I don't even know how much Dan Lanning's even been in Eugene. But I bring it up because, I think there are two things. Is one, I do think that there has to be the way I would do it is with the transfer stuff. NIL is just a completely different ballgame. But I think there should be probably like a 1 week cooling off period after the season where you can't enter the portal. First of all, I heard somebody say this today, can't enter the portal during the season. It's just such a load of crap. I mean, if you quit the team, you quit the team. But when you have kids visiting other schools while they're still enrolled, it's just weird. But I think, have a 1 week cooling off period after the season, because I think there's so much emotion after the season where, you didn't play, you're so upset, hanging. And I just think a lot of that would be, calmed. But then I also think there has to be a finite amount of time. If you want to be eligible next year, it can't just be, hey, I can leave on this day or this day or this day. And I know in basketball, I think it's July 1st, they've implemented it. It might be football too. I'd have to look it up. But I just think it has to be a shorter window where, and I don't blame Caleb Williams. He's taking advantage of, he's taking advantage of the system the way that it's currently set up, and he should take advantage of all his opportunities. But, imagine if Oklahoma, if Dylan Gabriel wasn't available, imagine if he had already enrolled at UCLA and couldn't get out. Then what do you do? I mean, then you're going pretty far down the list of who's available. Then you're potentially tampering with somebody else's players, so it's just, I like the new world. I think it creates a lot of interesting conversation. I think, the Caleb Williams conversation, as I said earlier, I think is one of the more interesting stories, in all of sports right now. Forget college football. I think it's more interesting than most of what's going on in sports, period. But I would like to see a little bit more, whether it's guardrails, whatever term you want to use, where it's not just a total free-for-all in NIL, a total free-for-all in college football. So.
Absolutely. And it's right, because he's such a generational talent that they never, like, those guys don't leave. It's like when you have like a really great player in baseball hit free agency at 26 or something. It's like, it never happens. Sure. I have one last question. There's a theory online. I don't know how far you get into online. I don't know. I wouldn't call it a conspiracy theory with college football, but as it relates to transfers, there's like a girlfriend theory where somebody has mapped out where like Keaton Slovis went to Pitt because his girlfriend goes to Pitt. And Caleb Williams, I saw this right before. Caleb Williams' girlfriend goes to the University of North Carolina.
I did not see that.
Shout out Jack Mack from Barstool Sports. I saw that earlier, but yeah, I don't know. UNC, Tar Heel Nation, they need a quarterback, so that could be one to keep an eye on here.
Yeah, I mean, if he goes to UNC, I mean, good for him, I guess. It's probably not going to end up being his wife, so I would highly encourage him not to do that. But what are you going to do? So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, this has been a ton of fun. You've been super gracious with your time, as always. We've been doing this, it's 2019. You've been hopping on here. So I always appreciate our time. Check him out Saturday nights, Fox Sports Radio, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. You have a great website with a whole bunch of blogs I was checking out earlier. You guys do a bang up job over there. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a lot of talented writers that work for me. We're trying to get a little bit more content going, but we do what we can. But yeah, the podcast 3 times a week. We're back 3 times a week. So it's a fun time of year. And what's great is, like I said, college football, college basketball are increasingly becoming essentially 365-day-a-year sports. And so it's fun it's fun to it's just fun because the interest, as we've discussed throughout this conversation, is clearly at an all-time high.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. You're the man. Take care, and everybody check out his podcast and his Fox Sports radio show. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, Justin. I